What if I told you that every dollar, every euro, every yen in circulation owes its existence to an invisible empire? An empire without flags, borders, or armies, yet more powerful than any nation in history. It doesn't conquer through war, it conquers through debt. Every country on earth, rich or poor, owes money to someone. But the question few ever ask is, to whom? This is the hidden story of how a network of private institutions, central banks, and global financiers quietly built a system so vast and so complex that even world leaders are just players within it. An empire that doesn't need to rule nations, because it already rules the system they depend on. This is the secret empire, controlling global debt behind closed doors. To understand how this empire came to be, we must go back centuries to a time when money meant metal, and kings ruled through gold. In medieval Europe, monarchs borrowed from wealthy merchant families to fund wars and empires. When they couldn't repay, the lenders didn't lose, they gained leverage. Debt became a tool of power. By the 1600s, one nation changed the game forever: England. After years of war left the crown bankrupt, King William III turned to private financiers for help. In 1694, those financiers created the Bank of England, the first central bank in modern history. It was privately owned, but it controlled the public's money. The deal was simple but revolutionary. The government could borrow money by issuing bonds. The bank would create money by buying those bonds. In other words, the more the government borrowed, the more money existed. The foundation of the global debt system was born. Over the next 2 centuries, this model spread across Europe and then the world. Banks learned that they didn't need gold to create wealth, only confidence. By the 1800s, great banking families like the Rothschilds mastered the art of sovereign lending, financing both sides of wars and rebuilding nations afterward at interest. Their true power was in the money they lent. It was in the debt they controlled. By the time the 20th century arrived, nearly every major power was operating under a central bank system, a model where private banks created money and governments created debt. But the world was about to explode. From the ashes, a new empire would rise, global, not national. The First and Second World Wars shattered economies and currencies. Nations printed paper money far beyond their gold reserves to fund total war. When the fighting ended, the world was buried in debt and desperate for stability. So in 1944, representatives from 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. There, they forged a new global order. The US dollar would become the world's reserve currency. It would be backed by gold, and all other currencies would be pegged to it. 2 powerful new institutions would be created to manage this system. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank they called it, international cooperation. But it was something more: the centralization of global finance under American influence. The dollar was king. Behind it stood the world's most powerful private financial networks, the ones that controlled debt creation. But the gold link wouldn't last forever. By the late 1960s, the United States had printed more dollars than gold to back them. Other nations, led by France, began demanding physical gold for their paper dollars. The US faced a choice: either give up its gold or give up the illusion. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon announced that the US would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. That temporary decision changed the world forever. Money was no longer backed by anything real. Debt became the new foundation of value. From that moment, the secret empire took full control, because now, money itself was debt. Central banks could print it endlessly. Governments could borrow without restraint. And global institutions like the IMF could dictate financial policy to nations in crisis through loans that came with strings attached. In the decades that followed, global debt didn't just grow, it exploded. In 1970, total world debt was around $3 trillion. By 2000, it reached $62 trillion. By 2025, it's over $315 trillion, more than 3 times the size of the global economy. But here's the secret: it's not random. When countries borrow from the IMF or World Bank, they often must adopt structural adjustment policies, privatizing industries, cutting social spending, and opening markets to foreign investors. The debt doesn't just demand repayment, it demands obedience. Nations become financially dependent, trapped in cycles of refinancing and austerity. And the creditors, the central banks, multinational lenders, and global institutions, quietly gain control over policies, industries, and even currencies. It's not conspiracy, it's architecture. Every financial crisis exposes the fragility of this system, yet each solution only tightens its grip. In 2008, reckless lending triggered the global financial collapse. Governments bailed out the banks, not the people, creating even more debt. In 2020, during the pandemic, central banks printed trillions to stabilize markets. The result? Record inflation, widening inequality, and unsustainable global debt. Every time the system breaks, the answer is the same: print more, pretend it's under control. But the math doesn't lie. The empire can unwind itself, because its power depends on the very debt that's destroying it. Today, the global debt system operates in plain sight. Hidden behind complex language, quantitative easing, fiscal stimulus, monetary expansion, but strip away the jargon, and it all means the same thing: debt creation disguised as prosperity. Who benefits? Central banks that lend money at interest? Investment firms that buy government bonds with newly printed currency? The elite financial institutions that sit between nations and their money supply, earning on both sides of every transaction. Together, they form the modern empire of debt. No single ruler, no single capital, just a global network of financial power that thrives when everyone else owes. Even digital currencies proposed as liberation are being absorbed into the same system, with central banks preparing digital fiat that can track, program, and control every transaction. The throne of debt has become smarter and far more dangerous. So what can we learn from this? First, debt is not just economics, it's control. Nations don't lose power through invasion anymore. They lose it through obligation. Second, the global financial system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. Infinite debt means infinite leverage. Third, real wealth has never been numbers on a screen. It's independence, land, skills, production, and resources that can't be inflated away. Every empire in history collapses when its debts outweigh its faith. Faith in currencies, in governments, in systems is starting to crack. When that faith breaks, the reset begins. The question is, who will write the rules of the next system? What this story helped you see the system for what it really is? Dan? T. Let it stop here. Share this video, question the narrative, dig deeper into who really profits from the debt you're told is necessary. Because behind the numbers, behind the banks, behind the promises, lies an empire that never sleeps. And the only way to defeat it is to understand it. Subscribe for more deep dives into money, power, and the hidden systems shaping our world.